The sun sparkled off the community pool as new residents moved their belongings into the houses of Oak Ridge. Kids ran across freshly cut lawns while parents chatted, already forming the bonds of neighborhood friendship. For the Taylor family, finding this place had felt like winning the lottery. After years of apartment living, they finally had a home with a yard in a community where people smiled and waved. "I still can't believe we live here," Mrs. Taylor told her husband as they watched their children play on the new playground equipment. "Look at how clean everything is." The neighborhood had that perfect feel, not too fancy that you couldn't relax, but nice enough that everyone took pride in it. Flower beds burst with color along the winding sidewalks. The community center hosted game nights and summer barbecues. Even the HOA meetings, which everyone dreaded in other neighborhoods, were surprisingly pleasant here. Mr. Lee, who moved in the same month as the Taylors, often remarked how different Oak Ridge was from his previous community. "The board actually listens there," he told anyone who would hear. "Last month I mentioned the tennis court nets needed replacing, and within 2 weeks, brand new ones were installed." The HOA was run by Mr. Thompson, a friendly retired accountant with a booming laugh who'd lived in Oak Ridge since the first houses were built. At each monthly meeting, he walked everyone through the budget with simple charts, explaining where every dollar went. The dues were reasonable. $250 a month covered all the landscaping, pool maintenance, and even set aside money for future repairs. "This is how all neighborhoods should work," Mrs. Rivera would say. She'd moved from a community where the HOA had been a nightmare of arbitrary rules and hidden fees. Here, when they raised the dues by a small amount to cover new playground equipment, everyone got to vote on it first. Even the annual inspection wasn't the dreaded event it was in other places. The board members would walk around with clipboards, but they were looking for ways to help, not punish. When Mr. Johnson's fence needed painting, the board connected him with other neighbors planning the same project so they could share the cost of hiring professionals. What no one realized then was how unusual their little paradise really was. They didn't know they were experiencing the calm before the storm, those golden days that they would later look back on with such longing. The first tiny change happened so quietly that no one noticed. The monthly financial report, usually 3 pages of detailed expenses, shrank to a single page of general categories. When questioned, Mr. Thompson explained they were streamlining communications. Then the playground swing broke. Just a small thing. A chain that snapped. But oddly, it remained broken for weeks despite several requests to fix it. The pool closed early one weekend for unexpected maintenance, but no workers were ever seen. The neighborhood newsletter announced that Mr. Thompson had appointed 2 new board members after longtime members moved away. There would be no election this time to ensure continuity of operations. The new members, Mrs. Winters and Mr. Collins, were introduced at the next meeting with little fanfare. "They'd come highly recommended," was all Mr. Thompson said, without mentioning by whom. Few residents paid attention to these small shifts. Life was busy with work and family, and most were just grateful to have a nice place to live. The lawns were still mowed, the flowers still bloomed, and the pools sparkled in the sun. Oak Ridge remained a beautiful place. Only Mrs. Wine, whose kitchen window faced the community center, noticed the expensive cars that began arriving for special board meetings that weren't on any calendar. She mentioned it to her husband, who shrugged it off. "They're volunteers, honey. They can meet whenever they want." And so life in Oak Ridge continued, with most residents happily unaware that beneath the surface of their perfect community, something had begun to rot. The day of the board meeting arrived with a tension that seemed to hang in the air over Oak Ridge. Mrs. Patel woke early, rehearsing her presentation one last time. The investigation group had been careful. They told only trusted neighbors about their findings, asking each to bring one reliable friend to the meeting. None of them knew exactly how many people would show up. The meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m. in the small side room of the local library where board meetings had been held since the community center closed. Mr. Thompson had chosen this venue carefully. It normally held only 30 people, making large attendance difficult. By 1:30, Mrs. Patel and her allies began arriving, each carrying folders of evidence. They nodded to each other silently, tension evident in their tight smiles. Mrs. Rivera brought her laptop and a portable projector, "just in case we get the chance to present properly," she explained. At 1:45, Mr. Thompson walked in with Mrs. Winters, Mr. Collins, and Mrs. Bolton. Their confident chatter died instantly when they saw the room already half filled with residents. Mr. Thompson's eyes narrowed as he scanned the faces. "Quite a turnout today," he said with a forced smile. More residents continued to arrive. By 1:55, every seat was taken and people began lining the walls. Mr. Chen quietly counted. Over 60 residents had shown up, a record for any HOA meeting in Oakridge's history. At precisely 2 p.m., Mr. Thompson called the meeting to order, his voice betraying slight nervousness. "We have a full agenda today, so we'll need to limit public comments to 1 minute per person," he announced, deviating from the usual 2-minute allowance. "Point of order," Mr. Chen stood up. "The bylaws specify a minimum 2-minute comment period that cannot be reduced without advance written notice to all homeowners." A murmur of approval rippled through the crowd. Mr. Thompson's face tightened, but he nodded curtly. "Fine. 2 minutes. Let's proceed with the agenda. First item, approval of the community center renovation project and associated special assessment." Mrs. Bolton quickly outlined the proposal, a $1.2 million project requiring a one-time payment of $5,000 from each household, due within 60 days. "The structural issues cannot be repaired. A complete rebuild is our only option," she concluded smoothly. "We'll now take a board vote." "Before you vote," Mrs. Patel stood up, "residents have the right to comment on this proposal." Mr. Thompson sighed impatiently. "Very well. Comments limited to the renovation project only, please." Mrs. Patel approached the front of the room. "Actually, my comments address financial irregularities that directly impact this proposal and all HOA operations." She connected Mrs. Rivera's laptop to the projector and displayed the first slide, a simple timeline showing the decline in services alongside the increase in fees. "Over the past 18 months, our HOA fees have increased 15%, while services have been cut by nearly 50%, she began. "The playground equipment was removed rather than repaired. The pool hours were reduced. Landscaping visits dropped from weekly to monthly. Yet our fees went up. Why?" She clicked to the next slide, showing bank statements with highlighted withdrawals. "More than $300,000 has disappeared from our reserve fund," she continued, her voice steady. "Money that was supposed to protect our community's future." Mr. Thompson stood up, his face flushed. "This is inappropriate. We're here to discuss the renovation project, not make unfounded accusations." "These aren't unfounded," Mrs. Rivera said, standing beside Mrs. Patel. "Every statement is backed by documentation, your documentation, obtained through legal records requests." She clicked to the next slide, showing the HVAC system photos and invoices. "This is the $85,000 HVAC system you installed in the community center," she explained. "Except it's not new, it's a refurbished unit worth approximately $15,000. Where did the other $70,000 go?" The room erupted in angry murmurs. Mr. Collins started to speak, but Mr. Wang stood up. "The same pattern appears in every project," he said, pointing to a chart comparing invoiced amounts to market rates. "Landscaping bills for weekly service when they come monthly. Pool maintenance charges at peak season rates year-round, and every contract goes to companies owned by board members or their relatives." Mrs. Winters laughed nervously. "These are wild accusations from people who don't understand how property management works." "I understand exactly how it works," said Jim, the former maintenance manager, stepping forward. "I was fired for questioning these practices. These invoices show work that was never done. I have before and after photos proving only partial repairs were made while full replacements were billed." For nearly an hour, residents presented evidence methodically. Mrs. Patel had coached everyone carefully. Stick to facts, avoid personal attacks, focus on the documented irregularities. The board members' faces grew increasingly pale. When the financial presentation concluded, Mr. Chen took the floor. "These actions violate our HOA bylaws, state regulations governing homeowners associations, and potentially state fraud statutes," he said. "We have 3 demands. Immediate resignation of all current board members, a full forensic audit of HOA finances, and repayment of misappropriated funds." Mr. Thompson stood up, attempting to regain control. These accusations are ridiculous and potentially slanderous. I move we adjourn this meeting immediately. You can't adjourn, called out a voice from the back. According to Article 7 of our bylaws, once a meeting has begun, it requires a majority vote of attending homeowners to adjourn, not just board approval. The residents voted overwhelmingly to continue. Cornered, Mr. Thompson tried a new approach. Look, there may have been some oversights in our management, but nothing malicious. We've all been volunteers doing our best. Is that why you approved payments of over $200,000 to your brother-in-law's company for work that was never completed? Mrs. Taylor asked, displaying copies of checks and invoices. The evidence was overwhelming and kept coming from all directions. Finally, Mr. Thompson slumped in his chair. We demand your resignations. Now, Mrs. Patel said firmly, or we take all of this to the district attorney tomorrow morning. The room fell silent as the board members looked at each other. One by one, they nodded in defeated acknowledgement. Fine, Mr. Thompson said quietly. We resign. The weeks following the confrontation were a whirlwind of activity in Oak Ridge. The morning after the board's resignation, Mrs. Patel called an emergency community meeting at her home. Her living room and kitchen overflowed with concerned residents eager to hear what would happen next. We've won the first battle, she told the gathered neighbors, but now comes the hard part, rebuilding our community. Mr. Chen, who had taken on the role of temporary legal advisor, explained their immediate challenges. We need to form an interim board until proper elections can be held. We need to secure our remaining funds before more disappears. And we need to assess the true state of our community's infrastructure. Hands shot up around the room as volunteers stepped forward. Mrs. Rivera, with her financial background, offered to lead a complete audit. Mr. Wang volunteered to coordinate an inventory of maintenance needs. Mrs. Taylor created a communication team to keep all residents informed of developments. Not everyone was optimistic. What about our money that's already gone? Asked an elderly resident from the back of the room. My retirement doesn't stretch far enough to cover another special assessment if we can't recover what was stolen. It was a question on everyone's mind. Mr. Chen answered honestly. We've filed police reports and provided all evidence to the district attorney. The investigation is ongoing, but recovering funds will take time, and we may never get it all back. The reality was sobering. Of the $300,000 missing from their reserve fund, much had already been spent or moved offshore. The legal process would be slow and the outcome uncertain. 2 days later, the first concrete step forward came when 5 respected residents were selected as the interim board. Their first official act was hiring a professional HOA management company with excellent references and a transparent fee structure. We need professionals with proper oversight, explained Mrs. Lee, one of the new board members. No more friends hiring friends or keeping the books in someone's home office. The management company's initial assessment was grim. Beyond the missing funds, years of neglected maintenance had created genuine problems throughout the community. The pool needed extensive repairs before it could safely reopen. The playground equipment removal had left dangerous concrete footings exposed. The community center did have legitimate issues, though nothing requiring a complete demolition. At the first official meeting of the new board, the management company presented a detailed recovery plan. The good news is that your community is fundamentally sound, their representative explained. The bad news is that addressing the neglected maintenance will cost approximately $180,000, and your reserve fund now stands at just over $500,000. It was a difficult position. Using existing reserves would address the immediate problems, but leave them vulnerable to future major expenses. Yet asking already upset residents for more money seemed impossible. The solution came from an unexpected source. Mr. Johnson, a quiet resident who rarely spoke at meetings, raised his hand. I build custom furniture as a hobby, he said. I could donate a piece for a community auction. Maybe others have skills they could contribute too. His suggestion sparked a wave of offers. A resident who taught yoga proposed community classes with proceeds going to the recovery fund. Another offered to organize a neighborhood food festival where local restaurants could showcase their offerings for a percentage donation. What began as a fundraising effort transformed into something more powerful, a genuine rebuilding of community bonds that had eroded under the previous board's divisive tactics. The first Oak Ridge Community Day was held 2 months later in the Central Park area. Residents set up booths showcasing homemade crafts, foods, and services. Children ran three-legged races on the newly replanted grass. The auction of donated items raised over $15,000, not enough to solve all their financial problems, but a meaningful contribution that represented something more valuable than money. Meanwhile, the legal process continued. Mr. Thompson eventually faced criminal charges for embezzlement and fraud, along with Mrs. Winters and Mr. Collins. Mrs. Bolton accepted a plea deal in exchange for testimony against the others. The court ordered restitution, though only about $120,000 was ultimately recovered. The physical rebuilding of Oak Ridge took over a year. Rather than rushing to fix everything at once, the new board prioritized safety issues first, then gradually addressed aesthetic improvements. Residents voted on each major expenditure, with detailed cost breakdowns provided in advance. The community center reopened with a modest renovation costing 1/5 of what the previous board had proposed. Volunteers painted the interior over a weekend, saving thousands in labor costs. The playground equipment was replaced with a modern design chosen by the community's children through a drawing contest. Perhaps the most important changes were invisible. The new HOA bylaws, revised with input from all residents, included strict conflict of interest provisions, mandatory competitive bidding for all contracts over $5,000, and requirements for financial transparency far exceeding state law. Every new homeowner in Oak Ridge now receives a welcome packet that includes not just community rules, but also the story of how their neighborhood was nearly destroyed by corruption, and how ordinary people working together saved it. 3 years after the confrontation, property values in Oak Ridge had not only recovered, but exceeded those of surrounding communities. Prospective buyers were attracted by the well-maintained facilities and unusually engaged residents. The irony, Mrs. Potall remarked to Mrs. Rivera as they watched children playing on the new playground, is that by trying to destroy our community for profit, they'd actually made it stronger. Mrs. Rivera nodded. People pay more for their homes here now because they're buying more than just a house. They're buying a community that proved it can protect itself. The lesson of Oak Ridge spread beyond its borders. Residents from nearby communities began attending their own HOA meetings, asking questions, demanding transparency. Some even invited Oak Ridge board members to share their experience and best practices. What began as a fight against corruption had become something far more valuable, a template for how ordinary people could reclaim power in their communities through vigilance, cooperation, and perseverance. 6 months passed, and the small changes in Oak Ridge grew more noticeable. The quarterly newsletter that used to detail every penny spent now arrived as a single colorful page filled with cheerful announcements but no numbers. When Mrs. Rivera asked about this at a meeting, Mr. Thompson smiled broadly and said, "We've moved to a digital format for financial reporting to save paper. Just email the board for details." But when she did email, the response took weeks, and what finally arrived was a document so filled with financial jargon that Mrs. Rivera, despite her years working at a bank, could barely make sense of it. "Something's not right," she told her husband over dinner. "They're hiding the numbers behind fancy words." The monthly HOA meetings, once held at 7 p.m. when most residents could attend, were suddenly rescheduled to 2 p.m. on Tuesdays. To accommodate our retired residents, the email announcement claimed. Mr. Lee, who worked from home, decided to attend one of these afternoon meetings. He was surprised to find only 5 people there: Mr. Thompson, the 2 new board members, and 2 elderly residents who seemed confused about why the room was so empty. "Where is everyone?" asked Mr. Lee. "Busy lives," Mr. Thompson replied with a shrug. "We can't expect full attendance at every meeting." The meeting lasted just 20 minutes. There was no open discussion period, no questions taken. Every vote passed unanimously without debate. Around this time, a pipe burst in the community center bathroom, flooding the hallway and damaging the wood floor. Weeks passed, but no repairs began. The center remained closed with a handwritten sign on the door, "Closed for maintenance." Meanwhile, every mailbox in Oak Ridge received an official notice. HOA fees would increase by 15% starting next month. The letter cited rising maintenance costs and necessary infrastructure improvements. What improvements? Mr. Taylor asked at the next evening gathering by the pool. The playground still has a broken swing, the community center is closed, and have you noticed the flower beds are full of weeds now? Others nodded. The once pristine neighborhood was showing visible signs of neglect. The grass in common areas grew too long between cuts. The pool water had a slightly greenish tint. Even the neighborhood entrance sign, once brightly lit at night, now had 3 bulbs burned out. Mrs. Chen, who had moved in just 3 months earlier, was puzzled. I asked when the community center would reopen for the summer programs they advertised on the website. The board secretary told me they're reassessing community needs. The changes were most obvious to Mrs. Wan, whose home office overlooked the main entrance. The landscaping crew used to come every Wednesday like clockwork, she told her neighbors. Now they show up maybe once every 3 weeks, stay for an hour, and leave. But I bet they're still billing for weekly service. A few residents tried bringing these issues to the board's attention. Mr. Johnson emailed about the broken playground equipment, only to receive an automated reply. Your maintenance request has been logged. Current response time, 4 to 6 weeks. The most troubling incident happened when Mrs. Taylor, who kept careful household records, noticed something odd while reviewing her bank statements. They're charging us the new higher HOA fee, she told her husband, pointing at the bank statement. But the increase wasn't supposed to start until next month. When she called the HOA office to ask about the early increase, the new secretary, Mrs. Bolton, was dismissive. The letter you received had a typo. The increase was always planned for this month, not next. Mrs. Taylor knew this wasn't true. She still had the original letter. But Mrs. Bolton refused to discuss it further. That evening, the Taylors invited the Lees, Riveras, and Chens over for dinner. As they shared stories about their interactions with the board, a pattern emerged. They're avoiding questions, Mrs. Rivera said, and the few answers they give don't add up. We're paying more, added Mr. Chen, but getting less. Where is the money going? They decided that Mrs. Rivera, with her financial background, would formally request to see the complete HOA financial records, something any homeowner had the right to do according to their bylaws. 2 days later, Mrs. Rivera received a reply from the board. Due to a recent computer system upgrade, financial records will be unavailable for review for approximately 90 days. We appreciate your patience during this transition period. They were being stonewalled, and they still had no idea how deep the problem went. While the residents of Oak Ridge were growing increasingly frustrated, the real drama was unfolding behind closed doors. Mr. Thompson sat at the head of a long table in his home office, surrounded by his carefully selected team. The blinds were drawn despite the sunny afternoon outside. The reserve fund now stands at just over $800,000, Mr. Thompson said, tapping his finger on a spreadsheet that only he and the other 3 people in the room had seen. That's nearly $5,000 per household that's just sitting there. Mrs. Winters nodded appreciatively. With her real estate background, she understood better than most the potential of that money. And the bylaws allow us to use it for community improvements without a full vote if we declare it an emergency. Exactly, Mr. Thompson smiled. We just need to document the urgent infrastructure concerns that require immediate attention. Mr. Collins, who had only lived in the community for 8 months before being appointed to the board, leaned forward. My construction company can provide all the documentation you need. We can write up reports showing urgent repairs required for the pool system, the community center foundation, even the neighborhood roads. Perfect, said Mrs. Bolton, the newest addition to their inner circle. As board secretary, she controlled all communications with the residents. I can make sure any questions get lost in paperwork or delayed responses. What none of the other residents knew was how carefully Mr. Thompson had assembled this team. Mrs. Winters wasn't just any real estate agent. Her company specialized in buying distressed properties. Mr. Collins didn't just own a construction company, he had 3 shell companies that could bill for services without actually completing them. And Mrs. Bolton wasn't just a friendly neighbor, she was Mr. Thompson's sister-in-law with a history of administrative roles in organizations that mysteriously lost funding. The key, Mr. Thompson continued, is to move slowly. If we suddenly stopped all services, people would revolt. Instead, we gradually reduce while continuing to increase fees. By the time they organize any significant resistance, the money will be safely moved. Mrs. Winters tapped her manicured nails on the table. And for those residents who ask too many questions, we have solutions, Mr. Thompson assured her. Selective enforcement of HOA rules can make life very uncomfortable. Mrs. Rivera, for instance, has a front door painted rustic red when the bylaws technically only allow classic red. A few $100s in fines might remind her to focus on her own affairs. The group laughed. The timing is perfect, Mr. Collins added. Housing prices in this area are rising so fast that even with higher fees and declining services, most residents won't want to sell. They're trapped by the market. Mr. Thompson nodded. And for those who do sell, Mrs. Winters' investment group will be ready with cash offers well below market value. Their planning continued for hours, mapping out how contracts would be awarded to friends and relatives, how maintenance requests would be ignored unless they came from preferred residents, and how the substantial reserve fund would gradually be drained through inflated invoices and fake emergency repairs. The next day, a truck from Collins Quality Construction arrived at the community center. The workers made a show of examining the building foundation, taking pictures and measurements while concerned residents watched. By afternoon, yellow caution tape surrounded the building. Structural issues, the foreman told curious neighbors. Can't say more than that. Board will make an announcement soon. 2 days later, every resident received an email with the subject line URGNT, Community Center Closure Extended. The message explained that engineers had discovered serious structural problems that would require extensive repairs. For safety reasons, the center will remain closed indefinitely. The board is exploring renovation options and will update the community when more information is available. What the email didn't mention was that Mr. Collins' company had already billed the HOA $45,000 for an emergency structural assessment, work that would normally cost less than $5,000. No actual repairs were scheduled. Meanwhile, at the neighborhood playground, a small crew removed the broken swing set entirely rather than fixing it. Safety hazard, they explained to disappointed parents and children. Board's orders. That same week, 3 residents received violation notices for minor infractions that had been ignored for years. All 3 had recently questioned board decisions at meetings or in emails. The pattern continued. The once weekly landscaping service was officially reduced to twice monthly to promote natural habitat growth and water conservation. The pool hours were cut due to staffing shortages, and the street lights at the community entrance remained dark while exploring energy-efficient alternatives. Every change came with a reasonable-sounding explanation. Every decline in service was presented as an improvement or necessity, and behind it all, money flowed steadily from the community's accounts into the pockets of Mr. Thompson and his inner circle. The residents sensed something was wrong, but they had yet to understand just how organized and deliberate the corruption had become. What they saw as incompetence or mismanagement was actually a carefully orchestrated plan. A conspiracy hidden behind friendly smiles and official letterhead. The moving van pulled away from the curb as Mrs. Patel carried the last box into her new home. After 15 years as a reporter covering city corruption, she'd left journalism for a quieter life in what the real estate agent had called Oak Ridge, the perfect community. Her first impression was mixed. The houses were lovely, but she noticed the overgrown common areas and dim street lights immediately. Within a week of moving in, Mrs. Patel decided to install solar panels on her south-facing roof. The HOA guidelines mentioned renewable energy was encouraged, so she filled out the required form and submitted it with detailed plans. 2 weeks later, she received a terse email, application denied. Current board guidelines prohibit visible roof modifications. Mrs. Patel was confused. She had specifically checked the guidelines before buying. She called the HOA office and spoke with Mrs. Bolton. The guidelines were updated last month. Mrs. Bolton explained coldly. Perhaps your copy is outdated. Could I see the new guidelines? Mrs. Patel asked. They're being finalized. I can't share them yet. Mrs. Patel hung up, her reporter instincts tingling. Something wasn't right. The next day, while walking her dog, she met Mr. Chen, who was struggling to fix his mailbox after a neighborhood teenager had accidentally backed into it. "You should call the maintenance number," Mrs. Patel suggested. Mr. Chen laughed bitterly. "I've called 5 times in the last month. They never come. Unless you're friends with the board, good luck getting anything fixed." That conversation shifted to other neighborhood issues: the closed community center, rising fees, declining services. Mrs. Patel listened carefully, mentally connecting dots. "Have you ever asked to see the financial records?" she asked. Mrs. Rivera tried. "They keep making excuses." Mrs. Patel smiled. "Would you introduce me to Mrs. Rivera?" That weekend, the 3 met for coffee in Mrs. Rivera's kitchen. Mrs. Rivera brought out a folder bulging with papers. "I've been keeping track," she explained, spreading out copies of old newsletters, emails from the board, and her own bank statements showing HOA fee increases. "Something fishy is happening with our money." Mrs. Patel examined the documents, her former investigative skills kicking in. "These financial summaries are deliberately vague. And look at this, they've stopped listing specific vendors for maintenance work." Mr. Chen pointed to a line item. "This says they spent $45,000 on a structural assessment for the community center. That's crazy high." "We need more information," Mrs. Patel said. "And more people." They created a simple plan. Each would talk to trusted neighbors about their concerns. They would gather maintenance requests that had been ignored and compare HOA fee records. And Mrs. Patel would research the board members' backgrounds. Mr. Lee joined their group next. As someone who worked from home, he had observed the maintenance crews coming and going, or often not coming at all. "The landscapers showed up last Tuesday," he told them during their second meeting, now held in Mrs. Patel's dining room. "They were here for exactly 47 minutes. I timed it. They mowed the front entrance and left. Nothing else." Mrs. Taylor brought old newsletters showing how detailed financial reporting had gradually disappeared. Mr. Johnson contributed photos of the playground before and after equipment was removed. But the real breakthrough came when Mrs. Patel did some digging into the board members. "Mr. Collins doesn't just own a construction company," she reported back to the group, which had now grown to 7 concerned homeowners. "He owns 3 companies with different names, but the same office address. And guess what? All 3 have received payments from our HOA in the last year." Their investigation accelerated. They created a shared online document where they compiled evidence. They took photos of neglected areas and kept logs of maintenance that wasn't happening. They requested official records through proper channels and documented each rejection or delay. Mr. Wang, who worked tonight, suggested they look at property records. "I found something interesting," he told the group 2 days later. "Mrs. Winters, our board vice president, her real estate company has purchased 6 homes in our community in the last year, all below market value." The pieces were starting to fit together. The neglected maintenance was driving down property values. The increased fees were putting financial pressure on homeowners, and Mrs. Winters was positioned to profit from distressed sales. One evening, as the group worked in Mrs. Patel's living room, they were interrupted by a knock at the door. An older man stood on the porch, shifting nervously. "I'm Jim," he said quietly. "I used to work maintenance for the HOA before Collins Construction took over. I've been hearing you folks are asking questions." They invited him in. "I got fired last year when I questioned some of the invoices," Jim explained. "They were billing for full replacements but only doing patch jobs. I have photos and copies of work orders that don't match what was actually done." As Jim shared his evidence, the group realized they had crossed a threshold. This wasn't just mismanagement or petty corruption. It was an organized scheme to defraud the entire community. "We need to be careful," Mrs. Patel warned. "These people won't give up easily. We need solid evidence of everything before we go public." They agreed to continue gathering information quietly. Each had a specific role: documenting financial discrepancies, photographing maintenance issues, researching board members, and reaching out to former contractors. Their kitchen table investigation was becoming something much more serious, and the board had no idea what was coming. 3 weeks into their investigation, the group gathered around Mrs. Patel's dining room table, now covered with stacks of papers, photos, and sticky notes. The mood was tense as they reviewed what they'd discovered. "I finally got access to the HOA bank statements," Mrs. Rivera said, her voice quiet but angry. "It took filing a formal legal request, but look at this." She pointed to a printout with several highlighted lines. "Over $300,000 has been withdrawn from our reserve fund since Thompson and his friends took control. That's almost a third of our total savings." Mr. Lee whistled softly. "Where did it all go?" "That's the thing," Mrs. Rivera continued. "The withdrawals match payments to Collins companies, landscaping services we barely receive, and consulting fees to firms I can't even find real information about." Mrs. Patel spread out several photos on the table. "These are the before and after pictures of the community center HVAC system that supposedly cost us $85,000 to replace." She pointed to technical details in the images. "According to Jim, our former maintenance man, this isn't even a new unit. It's a refurbished model worth maybe $15,000. The group had been working methodically, each following different threads of the conspiracy. Mr. Wang had been tracking landscaping services, documenting when workers actually appeared versus when they were billed. Mrs. Taylor had compiled a list of all maintenance requests that had been ignored or delayed, creating a map showing that homes closer to board members received prompt service while others waited months. Mr. Johnson had been photographing neglected common areas and documenting declining property values. "I talked to 3 real estate agents," Mr. Chen added. "They all say home values in Oak Ridge have dropped about 8% in the last year, while surrounding neighborhoods have gone up 5%. That's a 13% difference." Mrs. Lee, who had been quiet until now, slid a folder across the table. "I found something worse," she said. "A friend in the county permit office tipped me off. Look at these application forms." The group leaned in to examine the documents. "They've applied for permits for a complete rebuild of the community center," Mrs. Lee explained. "The plans call for demolishing the current building and constructing a new one at 3 times the cost. And guess who's listed as the contractor? Collins Construction," several people said at once. "The application estimates a cost of $1.2 million, Mrs. Lee continued. "That's more than our entire reserve fund. They'd have to charge each household a special assessment of at least $5,000 to cover it." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. "They're planning to drain the reserve fund completely," Mrs. Rivera finally said, "and then hit us with huge special assessments that many people won't be able to afford. And when people can't pay, they'll have to sell quickly," Mrs. Patel added, "to whoever's offering cash." She pulled out property records showing Mrs. Winter's real estate investment group had already purchased 6 homes in Oak Ridge at below market prices. Mr. Taylor, who had been analyzing the HOA financial projections, pointed to a disturbing pattern. "Look at these maintenance projections. They've deliberately underfunded regular upkeep to create emergency situations that require immediate action, which means no resident vote required." Jim, the former maintenance worker who had been helping them, shook his head. "I watched them do this at another community before I worked here. They create problems by neglecting basic maintenance, then use the emergencies to justify special assessments. The money goes to their companies, the work is done poorly if at all, and the cycle continues." Mrs. Patel pulled out her laptop. "I've been compiling everything we found. The evidence is overwhelming. We have proof of inflated invoices, services billed but not performed, conflicts of interest with board members hiring their own companies, selective enforcement of rules against residents who speak up, deliberate neglect of maintenance to create emergency situations, and a paper trail showing where the money's gone." "What do we do now?" Mr. Johnson asked. "Take this to the police?" "Not yet," said Mrs. Rivera. "We need to follow the HOA bylaws first. We're required to present evidence to the board before taking legal action. Besides, this affects everyone in the community. They deserve to know what's happening." Mrs. Patel nodded. "The next board meeting is in 3 days. They're planning to approve the community center demolition and special assessment then. According to the bylaws, any homeowner can speak if they sign up in advance." "They'll try to shut us down," warned Mr. Lay. "They always limit comments to 2 minutes and cut people off." "Not if enough of us are there," Mrs. Patel said firmly. "We need to tell our trusted neighbors, not everyone. We don't want the board to get wind of this, but enough to show strong support. As the meeting ended, they agreed on their plan. Mrs. Patel would prepare a presentation of their evidence. Mrs. Rivera would handle the financial details. Mr. Chen, as a homeowner who was also a lawyer, would outline the legal violations. They would create simple, clear handouts for other residents. This won't be easy, Mrs. Patel warned as they gathered their materials. These people have been getting away with this for over a year. They won't give up without a fight. Mr. Taylor looked around at the determined faces of his neighbors. Neither will we, he said quietly. This is our community, and we're taking it back.